LOREMASTERS! On this episode, we are talking about Shelob. But none could rival her, Shelob the Great, last child of Ungoliant to trouble the unhappy world. Ooh. This one line from The Lord of the Rings actually tells us a lot about the Great Spider. Well, it did after 1977, when Christopher Tolkien edited together his father's earlier works and published the Silmarillion. For you see, the Silmarillion tells the tales and histories of the Elder Days, the times before and during the First Age of the world, whereas The Lord of the Rings takes place at the end of the Third Age, if you follow me. Ungoliant is mentioned in the Silmarillion! That's the point that I'm trying to make. In The Lord of the Rings, there's only 13 pages that really have anything to do with Shelob. When Frodo and Sam first enter Torek Ungol, to when Sam defeats her and she retreats back to her lair. But in this brief span, Tolkien gives us a lot of wonderful, vague lore that hints to her origins. Where she's from, how old she is, what she is, even. And we're going to start with that bit that I quoted earlier, cause knowing that Shelob is a child of Ungoliant tells us everything. So Shelob's actually gonna have to take a back seat for a while, cause I gotta explain who Ungoliant is. And I hope everyone will excuse me as I once again try to summarize the earlier history of Tolkien's world in an attempt to explain who Ungoliant is as briefly as I can, alright? This is LOREMASTERS after all? I mean, I don't know what you were expecting. Here we go! Way back in the deeps of time, the world was created by a Iluvatar, and it was known as Arda. And spirits came down to inhabit the world, and these were the Ainur, the Holy Ones, which were made up of the Valar and the Maiar. Think pantheon of gods, if you will, kinda like Norse or Greek mythology. The Valar were the greater beings. The word literally means the powers of the world. They were the ones who shaped and fashioned Arda and brought it to life. Melkor was the evil one who turned evil and he did bad things. And then there were the Maiar, the lesser of the beings. They were thought of as sort of helpers to the Valar. Some examples of these would be Gandalf. He was a Maiar. The Balrogs were Maiars. Maya. I don't know how to say things. No one's gonna know who Melian is, but she was a Maiar too. And all of this, of course, leads us to Ungoliant and our first tidbit of lore about her from the Silmarillion. The Eldar knew not whence she came. The elves, more or less. But some had said that in ages long before she descended from the darkness that lies about Arda, when Melkor, the bad guy, first looked down in envy upon the kingdom of Manwë, the king of the Valar, and that in the beginning she was one of those that he corrupted to his service. So Ungoliant was a Maiar, an immortal spirit that entered the world at the beginning of time, like Sauron, or the Balrogs. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, she was a giant spider! And just like Sauron and the Balrogs, she was corrupted to Melkor's service, so she's evil. Big evil spider! Well, okay, she's not exactly a spider. Here's another important quote of lore. In a ravine she lived, and took shape as a spider of monstrous form. So Tolkien is very specific about how he words stuff, and this line is no exception. She wasn't actually a giant arachnid, alright? She was a spirit like all the other magical spirits, but she took the shape of a spider to represent her evil intentions. For one of her main traits was that she had an insatiable appetite. She devoured everything and anything that she could, just like real spiders. Just like Shelob. And we'll get to Shelob soon, I promise. Anyway, she even lived in darkness cause she ate all the light. Yeah, it's messed up. Big evil spider. Okay, so now you know a little bit about Ungoliant. Enough anyways that I can recount the story at the beginning of the Silmarillion cause it's super relevant and it'll help to explain where Shelob comes from. Here we go, again. In the beginning the spirits came down to inhabit the world, and the Valar began to fashion it as they saw in the music of the Ainur. But one of them was evil, Melkor. And every time they made something cool or shaped the land to their liking, Melkor would destroy their work. On an unrelated note, they got tired of the darkness that Arda dwelt in, so they made 2 lamps, Ormal and Illuin, to illuminate the world. But Melkor was all like, no, and he destroyed them. And the Valar were all like, aww. Eventually they got tired of the darkness again, and it was Yavanna who brought into being the 2 trees of Valinor, Telperion and Laurelin, which gave off a silver and gold light. So now Amin had light. The Undying Lands, where the Valar and the Maiar dwelt, in Valinor. And Melkor said, darn, I gotta kill those 2 trees. But he couldn't assail the Valar in their own realm, so he went searching for help, and in the region of Avathar he found one of his servants of old, Ungoliant, living in the darkness of that land. And he said, hey, if you help me kill the 2 trees, I'll let you eat everything you want in Valinor. And Ungoliant said, sounds like a plan, Stan. And so, with Ungoliant's help, Melkor scaled the mountains of the Pelori and came to Valinor during a time of festival, when all the inhabitants of that land were gone in celebration. They then approached the 2 trees, and Melkor smote them to their core with his great spear, and sap poured from their wounds like blood, and Ungoliant set her beak to them, and they were drained. Then the poison of death that was in her entered into them, and they died. But still she thirsted, and going to the wells of Varda she drank them dry, and she swelled to a shape so vast and hideous that Melkor grew afraid. Anyways, they went to Formonas and killed Finwë, High King of the Noldor, and stole the Silmarils of Fëanor. And you don't know what any of that means, but this event set in motion all the events in Tolkien's writings thereafter. And then they fled back to Middle-earth. And in doing these evil things, Melkor forfeited his name, and Fëanor named him anew Morgoth, the black foe of the world. And that's how he was known ever after. And I just mentioned this to confuse everyone. I mean, 'cause lore! It's the lore. You gotta know the lore. It's LOREMASTERS. Come on. What do you expect me to do, not mention that? So after all that Melkor, Morgoth tried to escape to his fortress of old, Autumno. But Ungoliant read his thoughts and stayed him, and she was all like, I still hungry. And Morgoth said, what the heck? You ate all that stuff in Valinor. What more do you want? And she said, thou hast stolen a great treasure from Formonas. Yea, with both hands thou shalt give it. Which was a sick burn! Because earlier Morgoth was all like, hey, help me out and you can eat anything you want. And he specifically said, with both hands I shall giveth. Big, sick, spider burn. So anyways, he gave her all the gems and jewels in his left hand, and she devoured them, and said, what about the other hand? But in his other hand Morgoth held the Silmarils. And she said again, empty your other hand. And Morgoth said, nuh-uh. The Silmarils are mine, and I name them unto myself forever. Then she rose against him, and enmeshed him in a web of clinging thorns to strangle him, and he sent forth a terrible cry that shook the foundations of the world. And his Balrogs of old heard his call, and emerging from their deep hiding places they came to their master's aid, and with their whips of fire they drove her off, and she fled to Beleriand, and dwelt beneath arid Gorgoroth, that dark valley that was after called Nan Dungortheb, the Valley of Dreadful Death, because of the horror that she bred there. Ooh. Okay, I know that was a lot of nouns, weird fantasy nouns, but we're almost at Shelob, alright? And now for one final Ungoliant related quote. And I'm going to continue right where I left off with the last one. Because of the horror that she bred there, for other foul creatures of spider form had dwelt there since the days of the delving of Ainband, and she mated with them, and even after Ungoliant herself departed and went whither she would into the forgotten south of the world, her offspring abode there and wove their hideous webs. And so there you have it. That's where Shelob comes from. Way back in time before the count of years, she was born in Nan Dungortheb, beneath the mountains of terror, as a child of Ungoliant, and probably some other horrible spider creature. And now that everyone kind of knows how that happened, we can finally start to discuss Shelob. Sorry that it took 3 pages of script to get to this point. Since there's a lot of quotes to dissect, I'm just gonna start reading quotes, starting with this big one, because it kind of reiterates what I just explained. Okay, so in The Lord of the Rings, Book 4, Chapter 9, Shelob's Lair, Tolkien is describing Shelob and her lair on the outskirts of Mordor. There age-long she had dwelt, an evil thane in spider form, even such as once of old had lived in the land of the elves in the west that is now under the sea, such as Beren fought in the mountains of terror. See? Now you kinda know what that means. Maybe? The land of the elves in the west is Beleriand from the first age, the mountains of terror where Ungoliant lived and Shelob was born, but under the sea? I guess I had better explain that. This is actually how Shelob came to be in Middle-earth. At the end of the First Age, the War of Wrath took place, where the Valar did battle with Morgoth, and so terrible was that battle that the lands were destroyed and sank beneath the sea, leaving what we know in the Second and Third Age as Middle-earth. And all living thanes in that time fled to the east to escape the ruination of that war. So Shelob crawled all the way to Mordor. And of course Tolkien references this all with one vague line. How Shelob came there, flying from ruin no tale tells, for out of the dark years few tales have come. Yeah, except I just told the tale. So there. Take that one, Tolkien. 1 for LOREMASTERS, 0 for Tolkien. Ha ha ha. Anyways, but Tolkien goes on. But still she was there, who was there before Sauron, and before the first stone of Barad-dûr. And thanks to the Tale of Years, we can see that Sauron took Mordor to be his place of residence around the year 1000 of the Second Age. So she made her way there even before him. She was the original creepy thane living in that land. And let's go back to that quote for a second, because I want to make another point. Once again, just like with Ungoliant, Tolkien describes Shelob as an evil thane in spider form. Not actually a big bug thane, more of a spirit, like her mother. And you know what, if she was a Maiar, then Shelob it probably is too, right? There is some proof to back that up, like the fact that she is seemingly immortal. Shelob was born before the count of time, but the Silmarillion tells us that the First Age was about 500 years long, and she was born before then at some point. And the Tale of Years tells us that the Second and Third Ages were each over 3,000 years. So we know for certain that she's at least, like, 7,000 years old, and probably a lot older than that in all actuality. Big, ancient, evil, spider! Okay, I got another point I want to make about Shelob, for all you people out there. Most like a spider she was, but huger than the great hunting beasts, and more terrible than they because of the evil purpose in her remorseless eyes. Monstrous and abominable eyes they were, bestial and yet filled with purpose and hideous delight, gloating over their prey trapped beyond all hope of escape. And with lines like these, Tolkien is trying to get the point across that she's more than just a big spider. She's a big, evil spider! Okay, but really she's intelligent. I just want to make that clear, because in the movie she just seems like a big dumb monster, because there's no narrator telling us all this information about her. In the book she even seems to have some kind of pact with Gollum where he brings her food, which is exactly what he's doing here, you know? Tricking the hobbits to go into the cave so Shelob will kill them and then he can take the ring? So he thought in an inner chamber of his cunning, which he still hoped to hide from her, even when he had come to her again and had bowed low before her while his companions slept. And I gotta mention this one last part of this big quote, because it's about spiders and the Lord of the Rings. This is LOREMASTERS, after all. Put your lore helmets on. Far and wide the lesser broods, bastards of the miserable mates, her own offspring that she slew, spread from glen to glen, from Ethel Duoth to the eastern hills, to Dol Guldur and the fastness of Mirkwood. And if any of you have read The Hobbit, and you should because it's a really good book, that's where the spiders of Mirkwood came from. They were the children of Shelob, just as she was the child of Ungoliant. There is one other quote from The Lord of the Rings that references how old Shelob is, and I'm just gonna walk you guys through it, because this didn't happen in the movies. And I love how Tolkien writes things, and I think it's really cool. So Gollum leads Frodo and Sam into Shelob's lair, and at some point Gollum disappears, and they're left alone in the pitch black of the cave. They then feel the malice of the eyes bent upon them, and they hear a gurgling, bubbling noise, and the horrible sound of great creaking joints. And it's at this time that Sam remembers the star glass, the light of Arendil, the lady's gift. So Frodo pulls it out and he says something in Elvish, although he did not know what he had said, for it was as if some other voice had spoken through his. Some sort of elf magic, no doubt. But anyways, Tolkien goes on to say, but other potencies there are in Middle-earth, powers of night, and they are old and strong. She that walked in the darkness had heard the elves cry that cry far back in the deeps of time, and she had not heeded it, and it did not daunt her now. Ooh. So first of all, Shelob is a badass. She ain't afraid of nothing. Later we see that the orcs are concerned that there might be an elf warrior on the loose. Little do they know that it's just Sam. But Shelob? Nah, she's not afraid of elves or their magic. After all, Tolkien writes that all living things were her food. There is some lore to be had in this passage though. She that walked in the darkness. And if you remember what I said earlier, the darkness refers to the time after the lamps Ormal and Iluin were destroyed, but before the rising of the sun and moon. Because it was dark. The darkness. Get it? It's just another reference to the fact that Shelob is really old. And this is one of the reasons I love The Lord of the Rings so much. The first time you read it, you just skim over information like, she that walked in the darkness. And you have no clue what that means. Even specific lore references, you're like, what? What is this fantasy babble? But then if you go read the Silmarillion and come back and read The Lord of the Rings again, it's like you're reading a whole new book. The older history of Tolkien's world is so heavily referenced in The Lord of the Rings that it boggles my mind that there was a first time that I read the book and that all this lore was lost on me. And here's a little quote from Tolkien himself in the foreword to the second edition. This tale grew in the telling, until it became a history of the Great War of the Ring and included many glimpses of the yet more ancient history that preceded it. But the story was drawn irresistibly towards the older world, and became an account, as it were, of its end and passing away before its beginning and middle had been told. The dude spent his whole life making this stuff! It's amazing! Okay, that's enough. I went off on a tangent there. My apologies. I got Lord of the Rings on the mind, if you can believe it. You know what? Let's change it up. Let's look at the films for a moment. I just want to point out that this isn't really what Shelob looks like. I'm sure they had reasons for making her look like a tarantula, but Tolkien describes her as more of a web-spinning spider. Here, look at this amazing artwork by Ted Nasmith while I read Tolkien's description. Great horns she had, and behind her short stalk-like neck was her huge swollen body, a vast bloated bag, swaying and sagging between her legs. Its great bulk was black, blotched with livid marks, but the belly underneath was pale and luminous and gave forth a stench. Her legs were bent, with great knobbed joints high above her back, and hairs that stuck out like steel spines, and at each leg's end there was a claw. And a tail with another claw at the end. I can't fucking do a Dylan Gribble voice if I had to. I wish she could have looked more like this in the movies. The spindly spider is definitely more creepy than the fatter, goofy CGI tarantula. They could have even gave her a stop motion kind of a look or something. That style of animation works really well with creepy, bug-like creatures. Here's some proof of concept. Also, she seems to sting Frodo through his mithril shirt? Huh? What? This movie won an Oscar? It doesn't even make any sense! Okay, let's talk about Sauron for a minute. It's kind of interesting to note that Sauron knew all about Shelob, and he was like, awesome. For a more sure watch on that ancient path into his land he could not have devised. But Shelob, on the other hand, had no idea about Sauron. She didn't care. Little she knew of or cared for towers or rings, or anything devised by mind or hand, who only desired death for all others. And this of course leads us to the real purpose of this video, to ask the ultimate lore question. Who would win in a fight, Shelob or Sauron? In this corner we have Sauron, the Dark Lord of Middle-earth. In days of old he was the lieutenant of Morgoth, and he had grown great in evil, wise in lore, and terrible in sorcery. But like his master, he had put forth much of his power into his fortresses and armies, and let's not forget the ring that he lost. Sauron is never mentioned as having or using any kind of weapon, so it looks like he's going into this fight fisticuffs. And in this corner we have Shelob the Great, last child of Ungoliant to trouble the unhappy world. Ancient beyond the count of years, she had grown great feasting on the blood of elves and men, and now she feared no end to her wickedness, and all living things were her prey. At the end of each of her great limbs was a claw, and she had some kind of stinger with venom in it, right? Now unfortunately you'd have to get Peter Jackson on the horn if you wanted to see a recreation of this battle with big computer animated special effects, because we here at LOREMASTERS definitely don't have the budget. You smell like Gondor. Shut up. Give me the ring. Never. I will find it and put it on my claw, and then I will rule this Middle-earth. Over Frodo's bruised and lacerated body, you will.